Now, in case you haven't noticed, there's a lot of Benjamins in American history, all about the Benjamins. Now, this Benjamin, like Benjamin Franklin, was also a self-taught man of science who published an almanac. This Benjamin, like Benjamin Rush, was also a devout man of faith who championed the freedom of slaves long before that was even remotely a popular idea. But this Benjamin also had many differences as well. He was never a member of the Continental Congress, and he never signed the Declaration of Independence. This Benjamin was a free black man during the founding years of our nation who had a dream of becoming a mathematician and a scientist at a time when, unfortunately, any formal education of a black person in America was nearly impossible. Nevertheless, Benjamin Banneker never let the circumstances at his birth dictate his life's achievements.
The story of Benjamin Banneker starts with his maternal grandmother, a woman named Molly Walsh, who, while working as a dairymaid in her native England in the late 1600s, accidentally tipped over a bucket of milk. Since the milk was lost to the master, he accused her of stealing it, a crime punishable by death.
I guess that was a good time to cry over spilled milk. Anywho, in England at that time, if an accused criminal could demonstrate an ability to read, his or her sentence could be shortened. So Molly Walsh requested a Bible, and she read it before the court. This was a practice termed calling for the book, and it literally saved her life.
I would imagine Molly Walsh never took education for granted. Anyway, instead of executing Molly, the authorities sent her to the British colonies in America as an indentured servant.
In 1698, Molly Walsh arrived in America, much like a slave, and worked at a tobacco plantation for 7 years, learning the art of tobacco farming. Now, tobacco farming at that time was an extremely profitable business, arguably the most profitable in the colonies at that time.
After 7 long years, she finally earned her freedom. And not skipping a beat, Molly Walsh then rented a plot of property in a beautiful river valley in Maryland and cleared enough land to grow a garden and a tobacco crop. Molly's first daughter, Mary, and her husband, Robert, had a son on November 9th, 1731, and named him Benjamin Banneker. Robert Banneker, like his mother-in-law, Molly Walsh, also dreamed of owning his own land because he believed that owning land made the difference between independence and slavery. Benjamin's parents, therefore, worked hard and scraped together 7,000 pounds of tobacco so they could buy 100 acres of land next to Molly's farm.
This is where their farm used to be. It's now known as the Benjamin Banneker Historical Park. Young Benjamin weeded the tobacco, hoed the corn, and tended the cows. And in his spare time, he went over to his grandmother's farm where she taught him to read and write using her most favorite treasured book, the huge family Bible.
Benjamin was an avid learner. He heeded the admonition of Proverbs 22:7 to apply his heart to knowledge, and he did so with all his heart. Minute after minute, step after step, year after year, Benjamin faithfully examined the world around him. After his father died, the farm required even more of his time, so he sacrificed sleep to continue his scholarly pursuits. As he grew older, his desire to learn continued to grow. He eventually was able to purchase his first book, a Bible.
Oh. Now, when Benjamin Banneker was 21 years old, he dreamed of building a clock. Now, clocks were somewhat rare in colonial Maryland, but he was nevertheless able to obtain a pocket watch to study, one just like that one. He examined every intricate detail of the watch, remembering the workings of it precisely enough to construct drawings of the interior. He then calculated the various size of wheels and gears and meticulously carved each piece out of wood. He even put a little icing on the cake by adding a bell that struck on the hour. And you think that's cool? Banneker's wooden clock kept accurate time for 50 years. This is Ellicott City, Maryland, about 20 miles or so west of Baltimore, named after the Ellicott family, a family of Quakers who moved here when Benjamin Banneker lived at this part of Maryland. The Ellicotts were an enterprising family of Quakers, and in the 1770s, when they moved here, they built a mill near the Banneker farm. A unique friendship began to blossom between Benjamin and one of the younger Ellicotts, 18-year-old George. Common interests connected the men, and a fascination with astronomy bridged the differences in their age, race, and social standing. Banneker marveled at the night sky when he peered through the telescope he borrowed from his friend George. Utilizing complex mathematical concepts along with a simple compass and ruler, he was able to construct projections of solar and lunar eclipses. Consumed by curiosity, Banneker embarked on his newfound hobby of astronomy. Banneker received some incredible news in February of 1791. President George Washington had chosen a site as the capital for the new republic, and he appointed a man named Major Andrew Ellicott to survey the boundaries of the new federal city. Now, Major Andrew Ellicott had lived near Benjamin, not far from the Banneker farm, and he was the cousin of Banneker's Quaker friend George. They needed an assistant, someone who knew astronomy and how to use scientific instruments. Banneker fit the bill perfectly and was chosen. He then embarked on what he described as his life's greatest adventure. For the next 3 months, Benjamin lived in an observation tent. He worked all night and caught naps during the day. He observed, calculated, and recorded notes used in surveying the 10-square-mile district, which became Washington, D.C. Here is a large replica of the map you can see at the Benjamin Banneker Museum.
As soon as Banneker had completed surveying the grounds for the young nation's capital city, Benjamin Banneker rushed home and continued work on his almanac. He worked tirelessly on the content for the next year's almanac. Finally, after much trial and error, a publisher finally agreed to print the almanac. Another one of Benjamin's dreams had become a reality. In 1792, the Banneker Almanac was published for the public. Banneker dedicated the almanac to the cause of equality and peace. The year before his almanac was published, Mr. Banneker sent a handwritten copy of the manuscript to President Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson was a noted scientist, and Banneker knew that the president would be interested in his mathematical and astronomical calculations. However, he also sent his calculations to Jefferson to prove the equality of the races. He knew that Jefferson wanted slavery ended, for it had been Thomas Jefferson who had introduced in Congress the first proposal to ban slavery in America. Benjamin Banneker's gamble paid off. Jefferson was indeed impressed by Banneker and his work. He promptly wrote Banneker praising him for the almanac and informing Benjamin that he had sent it on to scholars in France to be used as a tool in the fight for African American equality.
Banneker's 1792 almanac was a bestseller, and his subsequent almanacs flew off the shelves as well. But his publishing success never altered his modest, gentlemanly manners. But it did allow him to no longer need to make a living as a farmer, and he could dedicate his life to the profession that he loved. It's said that the only mathematical calculation that Benjamin missed was that of his own death. He lived a lot longer than he had predicted. But on October 9th, 1806, Benjamin Banneker passed away after a final morning walk on this land, the Banneker Farm. He was 75 years old.